She came to observe, but found a rhythm worth defending. The first sound Elison Grey heard that night was not music. It was the metallic slam of a police van door echoing through the hollow skeleton of an abandoned industrial district. The noise rolled across broken concrete and rusted steel beams like thunder trapped inside a cage. She stepped out of the car, adjusting the sleeve of her charcoal suit as cold wind pushed dust along the empty street. Blue and red lights cut the darkness into violent fragments. For a moment, the entire place looked less like a city and more like a battlefield frozen between breaths. Elison had come only to observe a quick appearance, a short conversation with a local officer. Then she would leave and write a brief report for the Cultural Foundation she had recently agreed to support. Pro bono work, public image work. She had learned long ago that in the legal world reputation was as important as victories. But the scene in front of her was nothing like the neat description she had received earlier. The police had formed a loose perimeter around a giant rusting warehouse that once stored machine parts. Decades ago, trains rolled through these tracks. Now the rails were buried under weeds and broken glass. The heavy bass rhythm still pulsed faintly from inside the building like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Someone killed the speakers seconds later. The sudden silence felt almost violent. An officer approached her. "You shouldn't be here tonight, Ms. Grey," he said without hostility, but with clear warning. "This operation is still active." Elison gave a polite professional smile. "I was informed a cultural incident was taking place. I represent a foundation interested in urban art initiatives." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Urban art? That is one way to describe it." He gestured toward the warehouse where several officers were escorting young people outside. Most of them looked barely 20. Some were younger. They wore hoodies, sneakers, bright jackets still damp with sweat. A few carried portable speakers. Others looked frightened but defiant. They did not resemble criminals. They looked like dancers whose stage had just been raided. Then Elison saw him. He walked between two officers, but not like a prisoner. He moved with relaxed balance, shoulders loose, eyes scanning the street, as if memorizing every detail of the situation. The tall man had dark hair tied back and a faint bruise forming along his jawline. His expression was not fear, not even anger. It was controlled irritation, like someone interrupted during something important. "That must be Marcus Reed," the officer said quietly, noticing Elison watching. "The organizer." Elison studied him more carefully. She expected arrogance or panic. Instead, she saw calm focus. Even with his hands restrained behind his back, he carried himself like someone used to being followed, not controlled. "What exactly is the charge?" she asked. "Illegal gathering, trespassing, noise violations, possibly endangerment. We are still evaluating the rest." Elison looked toward the warehouse again. "What happened inside before the raid?" The officer shrugged. "A battle." Elison frowned. "A fight?" "Not exactly." He nodded toward the building. "People dancing, competition style, crowd betting money, maybe small gambling. We had reports the place attracts trouble." Elison walked several steps closer. The open warehouse door revealed glimpses of the interior before officers blocked the view. The concrete floor was covered with chalk circles and scuffed footprints. Graffiti exploded across the walls in layers of color. Someone had dragged old spotlights inside, turning the space into a makeshift stage. She could still almost feel the rhythm that filled the room minutes earlier. What she saw was not chaos. It was energy, something raw and organized at the same time. Then Marcus looked at her. Their eyes met across the flashing lights. It lasted only a second, but something about the moment felt strangely deliberate. He noticed the suit. He noticed the way she observed instead of reacting. He tilted his head slightly, as if evaluating her the same way she evaluated him. An officer pushed him forward, but Marcus slowed for half a step. "You the lawyer?" he asked casually. The question caught Elison off guard. "I did not say I was." He smiled faintly. "You look like one." Elison crossed her arms. "Maybe I am. And you must be the man who organized tonight." He shrugged. "Somebody had to give people something better to do than fight in the street." The officer pulling him forward grew impatient. "Move, Reed." Marcus did not resist, but before walking again, he glanced back at Elison once more. "They will shut this place down completely," he said quietly. "Not just tonight. Everything." Elison felt curiosity sharpen inside her. "That sounds like speculation." "Not speculation," he replied. "Experience." The van door opened, and he was pushed inside with two other dancers. The vehicle engine started almost immediately that a group of younger dancers shouted protests, but police forced them back onto the sidewalk. The van disappeared down the street, leaving silence behind. Allison stood still longer than she expected, thinking about the calm certainty in Marcus Reed's voice. He had not sounded worried about his own arrest, he sounded worried about something larger. The officer beside her sighed. They will all be released eventually. Most charges are minor, but the city council has been pushing harder lately. Public pressure about crime. Those places attract attention. That he paused, studying her expression. You still interested in urban art initiatives? Allison looked at the empty warehouse again. Yes, she said slowly, I think I am. Her decision formed faster than logic usually allowed. She took out her phone and opened the contact file for the Cultural Foundation director. A short message appeared on the screen that I will represent the organizer in tonight's arrest. Pro bono. That if we want credibility in this project, we must show support when it matters most. She pressed send before doubt could interrupt. Then she turned back toward the officer. Where is he being processed? The officer gave her the station address. After he left, Allison remained outside the warehouse for another minute. The wind moved through broken windows, producing a hollow whistle. She imagined the place earlier filled with music and movement. She imagined the crowd forming circles around dancers, fighting through rhythm instead of fists. For someone like Marcus Reed, that building was probably more than a legal property. It was territory, purpose, community. Allison finally walked toward her car. She had come here for a simple observation. Instead, she had just chosen a case that could reshape her professional life. Completely. The police station. Nearly an hour later, the fluorescent lights made everything look gray and exhausted. The desk sergeant barely looked up when Allison introduced herself. Public defender list is full tonight, he said. You can speak with the detainee after paperwork. Allison placed her business card on the counter. I am not a public defender. The sergeant read the name, then suddenly straightened. Vance Gray Legal. You are a partner candidate there. Allison did not answer directly. I am representing Marcus Reed. The sergeant studied her as if trying to understand the logic of that statement. That one might be trouble. Ms. Gray. Allison leaned slightly closer. Good. Then I chose the right client. A few minutes later, she was escorted into a small interview room. The metal door opened and Marcus Reed walked in without handcuffs this time. He sat across from her, calmly studying her face, as if confirming something he already suspected. You actually came, he said. Allison opened her briefcase and placed a folder on the table. You assumed I would not. Marcus leaned back in the chair. People like you usually watch stories like mine from distance. They do not step into them. Allison folded her hands. I am stepping into it now. Marcus considered that silently. Then his expression shifted from curiosity to cautious respect. Oh, what do you want, Ms. Gray? Allison met his gaze directly. A fair trial. And the truth about what happens in that warehouse. Marcus smiled faintly. That might be harder than you think. The first movement of their strange alliance had just begun. The air in the interrogation room was thick with the sterile scent of floor wax and old coffee, a sharp contrast to the raw, metallic smell of the warehouse. Above them, a single fluorescent tube flickered with a rhythmic hum that seemed to mock the heartbeat of the city outside. Marcus sat motionless, his shadow stretched long and distorted against the gray metal wall. You're looking for a motive in the movement, Ms. Gray, he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly resonance that vibrated in the small space. But the only motive is survival. That building isn't a business, it's a barricade. Allison watched the way his hands stayed steady on the cold table. No tremors, no defensive posture. He wasn't a man caught in a trap. He was a man defending a border. When she pushed the water toward him, he didn't drink out of thirst, but as a calculated pause, his eyes never leaving hers, gauging if she was strong enough to carry the weight of what he was about to sign. You talk like someone who believes systems can work, Allison answered without hesitation. They can, but only if people inside them choose the right fights, he laughed softly. That sounds expensive for your career. Allison allowed herself the smallest smile that it might be. She slid a document across the table toward him. This is a temporary representation agreement. Pro bono. I handle the case. You cooperate fully. No surprises. Marcus read the paper carefully. The fluorescent light reflected in his eyes while he scanned the lines. You know my reputation in this district, he said quietly. Some people will not like you working with me. Allison leaned back in her chair. Some people rarely like my decisions. That is not new. Marcus finished reading the agreement. Then he placed the paper on the table without signing yet. One more question. He said that if this turns ugly, if the prosecutor pushes hard, you might lose more than a case. You might lose your position at that big law firm of yours. Allison watched him calmly. Are you trying to warn me? Marcus shook his head. And no, just making sure you understand the rhythm you are stepping into. Allison picked up the pen again. That I in that case, she said. Sign the paper. Marcus hesitated only a moment before writing his name across the page. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. When he finished, he slid the document back toward her. So what now? He asked. Now, Allison replied, closing the folder. We start building the truth. She stood from the chair, signaling the meeting was ending. But Marcus spoke again before she reached the door. You should see the warehouse in daylight. Allison turned slightly toward him. Why? Because you only saw the outside tonight. That he stood as well. The inside is where the real story lives. She considered the suggestion, then nodded once. That I will visit. Tomorrow, after your release. Marcus gave a small, approving nod. Good. He paused before adding something softer. The kids will not trust you immediately. They do not trust suits. Allison opened the door. That I did not come for their trust, she said. That I came for justice. Then she walked into the corridor, leaving Marcus alone in the room. The alliance between them was still fragile. But somewhere beneath the tension, a strange new rhythm had begun forming. And neither of them fully understood how much it would change both of their worlds. The dawn didn't break over the industrial district. It merely seeped through the gray haze, exposing the skeletal remains of the machine age. Under the cold, flat light, the warehouse looked less like a sanctuary and more like a relic, its rusted corrugated skin shivering in the wind. Allison stepped over a frozen puddle, the crunch of ice echoing against the hollow buildings that lined the street like silent, eyeless giants. Inside, the dust motes danced in the slanted shafts of light, indifferent to the legal storm gathering outside. Marcus was already there, his silhouette framed by the metal staircase, a solitary figure reclaiming his territory from the shadows of the previous night's raid. The city doesn't see the art, he said, his voice resonant in the vast, empty space. They only see the decay. But to the kids who come here, this decay is the only ground that doesn't shift under their feet. They will want to know what happens next. Allison crossed her arms. And what will you tell them? That we keep moving, he said simply. He finished adjusting the equipment, then stepped into one of the chalk circles in the center of the room. You ever seen a battle up close, Ms. Grey? Allison shook her head. No. Marcus looked around the empty space, imagining the crowd that usually surrounded him. It is simple, he explained. Point 2 dancers, point 1 circle. No excuses. You step in. You show what you can do. Then the other answers. That he moved suddenly, his body dropping low before twisting upward in a smooth, spinning motion. The movement was fast but controlled, like a conversation written in muscle and rhythm. Allison watched silently. She had seen professional dance performances before, but this was different. There was no staged, no costume, no polite distance between performer and audience. Every movement felt personal. When Marcus finished the short sequence, he stood again, breathing evenly. That is only warm-up, he said. But battles are not just about skill. They are about voice. Allison considered that word. Voice. Marcus stepped out of the circle. The kids who come here, they carry anger from school, from home, from the street. If they do not release it somewhere, it turns into something worse than they fight with movement instead. He shrugged. The city calls it illegal. Allison looked around the warehouse again. You built more than a dance studio here. She spoke the realization quietly. You built a sanctuary. Marcus studied her expression. That word makes politicians nervous. Allison smiled slightly. Many truths do. He leaned against one of the pillars, watching her think. What does the lawyer see? Now she asked herself. More than him. A place that prevents crime rather than creates it, she answered finally. And that changes the legal argument. Marcus nodded slowly. Explain. Allison opened her briefcase, removing a small notebook. The city claims your gatherings are dangerous, that they encourage illegal activity. But if we prove the opposite, if we demonstrate that the warehouse reduces violence in the district, then their argument weakens. She began writing quickly. That we need testimonies from parents, teachers, local residents. Anyone who sees the positive impact. Marcus listened carefully. That might work, he admitted, but the prosecutor will still push hard. Allison looked up. What do you know about him? Marcus answered immediately. Victor Sterling. She recognized the name. He wants the mayor's seat this year. Marcus nodded. And people like me are perfect campaign material. Allison closed the notebook slowly. Then this case will become public. She did not sound worried. She sounded strategic. Marcus noticed the shift in her tone. You are already planning the battlefield, he said. Lawyers do that, she replied. The sound of voices outside interrupted them. Seconds later, 3 teenagers stepped cautiously through the warehouse door. They stopped when they saw Allison standing beside Marcus. One of them, a tall boy with headphones around his neck, frowned suspiciously. Who is she? Marcus answered calmly. This is Allison. She is the lawyer helping us. The teenagers exchanged uncertain glances. The boy with headphones spoke again. A lawyer, he sounded doubtful. Allison stepped forward slightly. I am here to keep this place open, she said simply. That is all. The teenagers studied her for a moment longer. Then the smallest girl among them suddenly smiled. If she wins the case, can we keep the battles? The question made Marcus laugh quietly. Allison allowed herself a brief smile. Yes, she answered. But next time legally. The girl nodded with complete seriousness. That sounds boring. Marcus shook his head amused. See what you are up against, Ms. Grey. More teenagers began arriving at the door, drawn by the familiar presence of their leader and the strange new woman in a suit. The warehouse slowly filled with quiet conversation and cautious curiosity. Allison stood among them, realizing that the case she accepted the night before was no longer just about one client. It was about an entire fragile community balanced between rhythm and survival. And somewhere far across the city, a man named Victor Sterling was already preparing to destroy it for the sake of political power. The warehouse didn't just fill with people, it inhaled. The sound was a low-frequency hum, the scuff of rubber on grit, the rhythmic snap of a denim jacket, the heavy exhale of a teenager finding the only place in the city where they weren't a target. Allison leaned against a cold I-beam, feeling the vibration of a small bass speaker through the metal. It wasn't the chaotic noise the police reports described. It was a calibrated ecosystem. She watched an older girl patiently correct a child's footwork, their movements a silent, kinetic language of survival. You're looking for a ledger, Ms. Grey, Marcus said, appearing from the shadows of the mezzanine. But the only currency here is respect. You don't buy it, and you certainly don't get it from a suit. Allison didn't flinch. She opened her notebook, her pen poised like a scalpel. I'm not looking for a ledger, Marcus. I'm looking for the architecture of a community. If I can map the rules you've never written down, I can make the law see them. She closed her notebook. Look around, Marcus. This place has structure. You just never wrote the rules. He crossed his arms. That we never needed to. The community understands them. Allison tapped the notebook with her pen. And now we will document them. He looked intrigued. Explain. She pointed across the room. First observation, no weapons, no visible alcohol, no drugs. Second observation. Older dancers supervise younger ones. She pointed toward 2 teenagers helping a smaller boy stretch before practice. That is mentorship structure. Marcus followed her gaze, realizing what she was doing. You are turning the warehouse into evidence. Exactly, she replied. If we prove the space functions like a community program, then the prosecutor loses the narrative that this is criminal gathering. Marcus leaned back against the pillar, thinking, that might actually work. Before Allison could respond, the warehouse door opened again, but this time the atmosphere changed instantly. The warehouse door creaked, signaling the arrival of something that didn't belong to the rhythm of the street. 2 men in charcoal overcoats stepped inside, their presence instantly curdling the air of the sanctuary. Silence followed them, cold and clinical, as they scanned the graffiti-covered pillars with visible disdain. They didn't just bring a notice. They brought the weight of the city's political machine. The taller one handed Allison a thin envelope, his smile as sharp and artificial as a razor. Mr. Sterling prefers that problems are resolved before they become public scandals, he said, his gaze lingering on the dancers with a calculated threat. As they retreated, the heavy silence they left behind was broken by the sharp, hollow sound of a dancer kicking a glass bottle against the concrete. A frantic, helpless protest against the encroaching walls of the law. They cannot do that. This place saved half of us. Marcus stood silent for a moment, staring at the open doorway. Then he looked at Allison. So the war begins earlier than expected. Allison placed the notice inside her briefcase. Not exactly. She spoke calmly. It began the moment Sterling decided your story could help his campaign. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He wants to destroy the warehouse to prove the city needs stronger control. Elison nodded. Yes, but now we understand the real battlefield. She walked toward the center chalk circle again, looking around at the dancers watching her. What are you thinking? Marcus asked. That I am thinking, she replied slowly, that we cannot fight this quietly anymore. Marcus frowned. You mean media? Elison looked at him directly. Sterling wants headlines. Then we give him a different story. Point one, that shows what actually happens in this building. Marcus hesitated. The community hated attention. Attention brought police reporters trouble. But he also understood the alternative. If they stayed silent, Sterling would control the narrative alone. Finally, he nodded slowly. What do you need from us? Elison glanced around the room at the teenagers waiting anxiously. First, she said, that we show the city the real rhythm of this place. And for the first time since accepting the case, she realized the conflict had moved beyond legal arguments. It had become a public battle for the soul of the neighborhood. And somewhere in that growing storm, the fragile connection between her world of law and Marcus's world of rhythm had only just begun to evolve. Twilight didn't settle over the industrial district. It bruised the sky in shades of violet and charcoal. The warehouse, once a skeletal secret, now breathed with a heavy, magnetic pulse. News of the legal blockade had acted as a catalyst, drawing the community together like iron filings to a magnet. The air was thick with the scent of rain-dampened asphalt and the ozone tang of overworked speakers. When the beat finally dropped, it wasn't just sound. It was a seismic event. Elison stood at the edge of the circle, the vibration traveling up through the soles of her heels, a raw, kinetic energy that defied the cold logic of her briefcase. Two dancers collided in the center, their movements a frantic, beautiful calligraphy of defiance. They didn't just move. They reclaimed the space, their shadows stretching long and jagged against the graffiti-covered walls as if trying to tear themselves free from the concrete. His body twisted through sharp angles, each motion answering the rhythm with precise control. The second dancer responded immediately, sliding low across the floor, before launching into a rapid sequence of spins and freezes. The crowd shouted encouragement, but never crossed into the circle. The battle remained respectful. Even during the most aggressive exchanges, Elison felt the atmosphere change completely. This was not just dance. It was dialogue expressed through motion. Every step challenged the other dancer to respond more creatively. When the music stopped, the crowd cheered both performers equally. No judges, no official scores. Just mutual recognition of skill. Marcus leaned slightly closer. You see now. Elison nodded slowly. I see something the city refuses to understand. The battles continued. Point one after another. Different styles, different personalities. Some dancers performed with explosive power. Others moved with quiet precision. But every battle followed the same invisible structure. Marcus eventually stepped into the circle himself. The room reacted instantly with louder cheers. He stretched his shoulders once, then waited for the next track to begin. When the beat dropped, his body responded without hesitation. His movements carried confidence that only years of experience could create. He did not dance to impress the crowd. He danced like someone telling a personal story through rhythm. Elison realized she had stopped analyzing. She was simply watching. When Marcus finished the battle, the younger dancers surrounded him, laughing and celebrating. He stepped out of the circle, breathing lightly, and walked back toward Elison. You look different, he said. She tilted her head. How so? You are not studying anymore. He smiled slightly. You are feeling the rhythm. Elison closed her notebook completely. Perhaps. Evidence sometimes needs to be experienced, not just recorded. Marcus leaned against the pillar beside her. You will win this case, if anyone can, but Sterling will not give up easily. Elison looked across the warehouse at the dancers still moving inside the circle. I know. She spoke quietly. That is why we must move faster than he expects. Marcus followed her gaze. You sound like you enjoy the challenge. Elison considered the question carefully before answering. I enjoy fighting battles that matter. The music changed again into a slower rhythm. Some dancers practiced new moves near the edges of the room while others rested against the walls. The warehouse felt alive in a way no courtroom ever did. Marcus studied Elison's expression for a moment longer before speaking again. There is something you should know about Sterling. Elison turned toward him. Listening, he does not lose gracefully, Marcus said. If he decides destroying this place helps his campaign, he will not stop with legal arguments. Alison's eyes narrowed slightly. You think he will fabricate evidence? Marcus did not answer immediately, but the silence between them was enough. Alison reopened her notebook slowly. Then we prepare for that possibility too, she said. Because if Sterling decides to play dirty, we will make sure the entire city sees exactly how he does it. The rhythm of the music echoed through the warehouse again. As the dancers continued their battles, a different kind of battle quietly began forming between law and power. And neither Alison nor Marcus yet realized how personal that conflict was about to become. 2 days later, the story left the warehouse and entered the city. The change happened quietly at first. A short video appeared on social media early in the morning. It showed only simple scenes from the industrial building. Dancers practicing. A small group of teenagers helping a younger boy learn basic steps. Marcus explaining rules to newcomers. No shouting. No chaos. Just rhythm and structure. The video ended with a simple message painted across the screen. This place keeps us moving forward. By noon. The clip had spread far beyond the neighborhood. Local reporters began asking questions. Some recognized Marcus Reed's name from the arrest report earlier that week. But the images did not match the usual story about illegal gatherings. They showed discipline. They showed community. By afternoon, Elison Grey's phone had not stopped vibrating. She sat inside a small conference room at her law firm reviewing documents while messages from journalists and colleagues filled her screen, the glass walls around. The room reflected the polished calm of a successful corporate environment. Expensive furniture. Ordered silence. The opposite of the warehouse rhythm. She closed the laptop slowly when the door opened. Richard Halston stepped inside. He was one of the senior partners of the firm and the man who quietly controlled most of its political connections. His suit looked perfect as always, but his expression carried visible irritation. I assume you have seen the news, he said. Alison remained seated. Yes, the community finally has a voice. Halston walked to the table, placing a printed article in front of her. The headline read, City Prosecutor Targets Illegalden Sub Critics Galatut Sanctuary. You did not inform the firm that your pro bono project would turn into a media spectacle. Alison met his gaze calmly. The situation evolved faster than expected. He crossed his arms. The problem is not speed. The problem is visibility. He tapped the newspaper. Our firm handles multiple government contracts. The same government whose prosecutor you are now publicly challenging. Alison closed the article carefully. I am defending a client against questionable charges. That is the function of law. Halston's patience thinned. Do not lecture me about law. I am reminding you about politics. He walked closer, lowering his voice. Victor Sterling contacted our office this morning. Alison's eyes narrowed slightly. That was faster than she expected. What did he want? He suggested that continuing your involvement in this case may create complications for the firm's relationship with the city. Halston studied her reaction carefully. In other words, he wants you removed. Alison leaned back in the chair. And what is the firm's position? Halston did not answer immediately. That silence already contained the truth. Finally, he spoke. We would prefer the case transferred to another attorney within the firm, someone less visible. Alison understood the strategy instantly. Another lawyer would quietly negotiate a settlement. Marcus would accept minor charges. The warehouse would close. The political story would end cleanly. She shook her head. No. Halston exhaled slowly. I expected that answer. But you must understand the consequences. Alison stood from the chair facing him directly. I understand them perfectly. The firm values stability and contracts. I value justice. Halston's tone hardened. Do not pretend this is purely noble. You are also protecting your own reputation. That comment might have angered someone else, but Alison simply nodded. Yes, that is true as well. But reputation built on surrender is worthless. Halston stared at her for several seconds. You realize Sterling will escalate. He believes destroying that warehouse will strengthen his campaign. Then he will escalate, Alison replied calmly. And I will respond. The senior partner shook his head slowly. You are choosing a dangerous hill to defend. Alison picked up her briefcase. Some places are worth defending. He stepped aside, allowing her to reach the door before she left. He spoke again. If the prosecutor increases pressure, the firm may have to reconsider your position here. Alison paused briefly without turning back. I assumed as much, she said. Then she walked out of the conference room, leaving Halston alone with the newspaper and the growing storm outside. The difference between the two worlds became clear again that evening. Back in the warehouse, the music returned stronger than ever. News coverage had brought even more dancers and supporters. People from nearby districts arrived curious to see the place everyone suddenly talked about. Marcus stood near the entrance greeting. Familiar faces. When Elison entered, he noticed the tension in her posture immediately. "You spoke with your firm," he guessed. She nodded. "They want me off the case." Marcus did not look surprised. "That I warned you about that rhythm." Elison placed her briefcase on a nearby crate. "But they did not remove me yet." He studied her expression. "You refused to step away." "Yes," she answered simply. Marcus laughed quietly. "That must have been an interesting conversation." Elison allowed herself a small smile. That it was efficient. That he looked around the warehouse, now louder and brighter than before. The media exposure worked, but it also means Sterling will attack faster. Elison nodded. "I know." She hesitated before adding something more personal. "If the pressure grows too strong, it may cost me my position at the firm." Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "That matters to you?" Elison considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not enough to abandon this case." He watched her for a moment longer before speaking again. "Then we fight together." He extended his hand. Elison looked at it briefly before shaking it firmly. Around them, the dancers prepared another battle circle. The music rose again, filling the warehouse with energy that refused to disappear. No one in the room realized that somewhere across the city, Victor Sterling was already preparing his next move. And this time the attack would not rely only on intimidation. That it would aim to destroy both Marcus Reed and the lawyer brave enough to stand beside him. The warehouse didn't just wake up the next morning, it braced itself. The air inside was a thick cocktail of cold iron, cheap coffee, and the sharp, electric scent of a community finally finding its voice. Mothers in worn winter coats stood shoulder to shoulder with teachers who had seen too many of their students disappear into the city's cracks. Elison moved between them like a ghost in a charcoal suit, her legal pad catching every fragment of their truth. Each testimony was a jagged piece of evidence, a raw rebuttal to Sterling's polished lies. "You're not just filing a motion, Elison," Marcus said, his voice low as he watched a local shopkeeper describe how the warehouse had cleared the drug dealers from his storefront. "You're rewriting the map of this district." She didn't look up, but her pen gripped the paper tighter. She was no longer just managing a case. She was orchestrating a counteroffensive. When the black sedans of the prosecutor's office idled at the curb, their tinted windows reflecting the gray sky like obsidian, the warehouse didn't flinch. It inhaled, ready for the strike. At one point, one of Sterling's men attempted to approach a dancer aggressively. Marcus stepped in front calmly, a subtle warning in his gaze, and the man retreated without incident. Elison noted every interaction, ensuring a full record. By late afternoon, the warehouse felt different. The energy was no longer purely defensive. It was confident, deliberate, purposeful. Every movement, every statement, every captured image reinforced the sanctuary they had built. Elison closed her notebook as the last interviews ended. Exchanging a brief look with Marcus, he nodded slightly, acknowledging both her precision and the unspoken rhythm that had guided the day. Outside, the black sedan departed. Sterling would regroup, plan his next move, but for now, Elison and Marcus had turned the tide. Their battle had only just begun, but the lines were clear: law and rhythm, community and power, truth and manipulation, all poised for the inevitable confrontation that would define the future of the warehouse and the fragile trust between lawyer and dancer. That evening, Elison returned to the warehouse alone, long after the dancers and witnesses had left. She walked slowly through the empty space, listening to the echoes of the day's activity. The music had faded, leaving only the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above and the occasional creak of the building settling. She paused at the center circle, tracing the chalk lines with her finger. Each mark, each scuff on the floor, told a story of discipline, mentorship, and community cohesion, evidence Sterling could not manipulate. Footsteps approached from the entrance. Marcus stepped in quietly, his presence filling the space without a word. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. They did not need words yet. They both understood the stakes. He moved to the chalk circle beside her, spinning lightly on the balls of his feet to stretch. Tomorrow, Allison said, the City Council's Legal Review Board will consider Sterling's petition. He exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the empty warehouse. Those papers they served us? They will try everything to make this look dangerous. She nodded. Yes. But we already turned public perception. Sterling can fabricate evidence, but he cannot erase the community he underestimated. Marcus's expression hardened. That I still worry about him manipulating the legal system. That a small smile crossed Allison's face. That I know. That's why we're ready. He studied her for a moment, then nodded in silent agreement. The door creaked as a cold wind passed through the broken windows, and for the first time since the raid, the warehouse felt fully theirs again, not just a place for dance, but a symbol of resistance. Marcus moved toward one of the pillars, stretching again, his body a fluid contrast to Allison's still postured. You've changed, he said softly. That you're not just observing anymore. You're part of it. She met his gaze. That I've always known what matters. Now I'm acting on it. He smiled faintly. It's dangerous, you know. Allison glanced around the empty space. That's why it matters most. The two of them stood in silence as shadows stretched across the floor, the fading sunlight mixing with the fluorescent glow above. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the battles unfolding inside its streets. But inside, law and rhythm had aligned, forming a fragile yet undeniable alliance. And somewhere in the coming days, Victor Sterling would learn that power underestimated cannot remain unchallenged. Sterling wasn't just planning to argue about noise complaints. His files now contained fabricated reports of illegal betting rings managed by Marcus, reframing the sanctuary as an underground casino for minors. The warehouse, once a ruin, now breathed as a fortress. And Allison and Marcus, lawyer and dancer, stood ready to defend it. No matter what Sterling would throw next, the courthouse didn't just loom. It stood as a monument to a system that had long ignored the pulse of the district. Inside, the air was pressurized, a sterile vacuum where the scent of polished wood and old paper tried to drown out the raw energy Allison had carried from the warehouse. Victor Sterling sat at the prosecution table, his silhouette sharp against the mahogany, his presence a cold, calculated shadow. In the courtroom, Sterling presented the warehouse as a den of lawlessness, showing grainy photos of the raid as proof of chaos. But Allison didn't flinch. She called to the stand the local shopkeeper and a high school principal, then played the video of the older dancers teaching the youth. This isn't a lack of rules, Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. It's a different jurisdiction, one governed by respect and discipline that the city failed to provide. My client didn't steal this territory, he salvaged it. When she presented the logs of mentorship hours, the prosecution's gambling narrative collapsed under the weight of documented community service. But when Allison spoke, she didn't just cite statutes. She channeled the rhythm of the streets. Each piece of evidence, the testimonies, the mentorship logs, the raw footage of the battles, hit the floor like a heavy beat. Marcus stood as the living proof, his quiet dignity more resonant than any of Sterling's rehearsed accusations. When the judge finally spoke, the words weren't just a verdict, they were a declaration of territory. The charges didn't just vanish, they were dismantled. By the time the judge hammered his final gavel, Allison's phone had one new notification. It was a formal dismissal from Elison Grey Legal, signed by Halston. She looked at the screen, then at the crowded benches of the courtroom where parents and dancers were already standing to celebrate. For a moment, the silence of the high-rise office felt like a distant, hollow echo compared to the resonance of this room. She deleted the email without a second thought. She had lost a title, but she had gained a legacy. Outside, on the stone steps, the winter sun finally broke through the gray, catching the triumph in the eyes of the dancers who had refused to be erased. Allison looked at Marcus, the silence between them no longer a gap, but a shared cadence of victory. Marcus waited for her at the bottom of the stone steps. He didn't offer a rehearsed speech of thanks. Instead, he simply nodded toward the street where the rhythm of the city felt different, more intentional and less threatening. So, what's the next move, counselor? He asked, a genuine smile finally breaking through his guard. Allison adjusted her briefcase, no longer feeling the weight of the firm's expectations. The same as yours, Marcus, she replied. We keep moving. But this time, we do it with the light on.